Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. I hope you can hear me at home. If you can't, you can text me, and we'll see if it's working. But God willing, you can hear me at home or at work or wherever you are. Okay. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. I hope you were able to find a seat. So, there are quite a few people who are tuning in from their desks or places of business or wherever. So, welcome to all of you who are here. But for those of us who are here in the chapel, it's an intimate gathering, and there's plenty of soda left, so we don't have to worry about that. One of the complaints I sometimes get on Friday nights is they ran out of Diet Coke, or we ran out of cookies. There's plenty of cookies left, so you may want to take some and then hide them somewhere, and then on Friday night it'll be there waiting for you if the mice don't get it. But we bar mitzvahed the mice, so none of them are here anymore. That's why, right? Right? You heard that one, right? That's why you don't have mice in shul. It's like a good way to get rid of them. Okay.
In other words, get pet cats.
Is what?
Get pet cats.
Pet cat. That's what they do in Israel. Right. That's what they do in Israel. Okay. So, I wanted to talk today about the current state of the Reform movement for a couple of reasons. One, I could have titled this "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly," and because there's definitely a fair bit of each to discuss when we talk about where the Reform movement is right now, and maybe where it's going. But I bring it specifically today because I just came from a meeting last week in Dallas, Texas. Here comes one more. Oh, hi, Jackie. Called the URJ, Union for Reform Judaism's Large Congregations Meeting, which stands for, we're good? Union for Reform Judaism, which used to be the UAHC, if you remember that, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. It was changed maybe 10 or so years ago to the URJ. So they have this meeting every other year called the Large Congregations Meeting, in which the senior rabbi, the president, and the executive director of about the 30 largest congregations in North America are invited. And it really means any synagogue that has 1,000 families or more. So if you're a rabbi of 900 families, you're not invited. And there are some every year who kind of slip under, their 1,000 and so forth. So those are the ones I call and say, "Oh, hey, are you going to this meeting?" No, I don't do that anymore. So, when I was in Fort Myers, I didn't even know that this thing existed. So when I got here and they invited me to it, I'm like, "Large congregations meeting? That's a thing? I didn't know that you did that." It's really fascinating. So basically, you spend 2 days at the airport hotel in Dallas, Texas. It's very, very fancy. I had a corner room that overlooked the runway. But it's actually very nice because you have about 29 other rabbis, 30 synagogue presidents, and 30 executive directors who are all in pretty similar positions to what we are. Although I can tell you at this last meeting, we were the talk of the town because we have something going on that a lot of people don't. And the thought of raising $55 million and actually doing something with it, different than what you've already been doing, is pretty unusual. There's a congregation in San Francisco that raised well more. They raised probably in the 90s. And what'd they get for it? Nothing. They gutted their building and redid it, because their building is from like the 1800s. And so it was falling apart. So it needed to be complete. And their building's like a whole city block. It's a massive temple. So they basically gutted it and rebuilt it. Now it looks beautiful. What do they have different to offer than what they have? Nothing. It's just, now when you turn the doorknob, it opens. I mean, now they have, things that work. Maybe they have a new program or two, but nothing like what we're doing here. And a lot of the big synagogues in urban areas, like in New York and LA, Chicago, they can't offer that much because they're really constrained in where they are. They have no parking. And they don't have fields and basketball courts and, big sprawling campus like we do. There are some that do. Most of the ones that do don't have our weather. So they're inside the whole time. So we're really uniquely situated in what we can offer and where we are geographically and so forth. And also the fact that we have so many young people. You can probably hear them. Having just come from this meeting and having also just come from a CCAR board retreat, and of which I serve on, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, I've heard a lot in the last month about where the movement is going, where it is, where it's coming from, and a lot of it is very concerning, and that's what I wanted to share with you today. So let's just first do the alphabet soup. Okay, so Isaac Mayer Wise. How many of you ever heard of Isaac Mayer Wise? Okay. So Isaac Mayer Wise, essentially the founder of Reform Judaism in the United States. Reform Judaism started in Europe, primarily in Germany. It really started with some ideas that began, and I don't want to do a whole class on the birth of Reform Judaism, but it really started to begin in the late 1700s, very late 1700s, by a guy named Moses Mendelssohn, who first said Jews don't need to look like Jews all the time because, other people don't really love Jews. So he had the famous line in Berlin, which was, Jews should dress like a tent or behave like a Jew in their tent and a Gentile in the street. And that was the first time he ever said, maybe you don't need to wear a yarmulke when you're walking around. Maybe you don't need to wear a big black coat when it's 80 degrees out and, look so much different than everyone else. Maybe if you blend in, that will help. That was in Germany in the 1799. It didn't work out so well. But that started to begin the idea of what it meant for a Jew to blend in and assimilate into society, which ultimately led to some different ways of looking at Jewish law. Isaac Mayer Wise brought those ideas to America. I mentioned him in one of my sermons on the High Holy Days. He was in New York. He had a significant fight with the president of the congregation, manifested on Rosh Hashanah when he punched the president in the face. Not a great career move. If he wanted to stay there, he was then fired, ended up in another congregation, didn't work out, moved to Cincinnati. But I think it's fair to say that had he not punched out that rabbi, or the president of that congregation, and moved to Cincinnati, then I never would have met my wife. Because I met my wife in Cincinnati. And there's only I wasn't going to Cincinnati for any other reason, I can tell you that. It's a nice town, but enough about me. So Isaac Mayer Wise, when he gets to Cincinnati, he founds 3 organizations. The Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which is today what we call the URJ, because he said if we're going to be a movement, our congregations have to be linked together in a union. So he founded that. He founded HUC, Hebrew Union College, and he said if you're going to have a movement of Reform synagogues, then you need Reform rabbis, and we need to train them. So he started the Hebrew Union College, and Aaron's great uncle was one of the original 4 graduates of the first class in 1879, I think. Founded 1875. So the first class graduated 4 years later, 1879. And there's a picture of his great uncle, David Phillips, on the 2nd floor in Cincinnati with the other 3 guys. It's ironic because even before I met you, I could never remember who the other 3 guys were, but I always remembered Phillipson for whatever reason. So they have a picture of every graduating class on the 2nd floor. And so you see the first class is 4 people, And then as you get over 1880, 1890, 5 people, 10 people, 11 people, 1900, 1920, 1930, 1940, 10, 20 graduates. 1965, 50 graduates. 1966. It's funny how the draft encouraged many people to decide to become rabbis. And if you walk through, you can see that during the Vietnam years, the classes were enormous. And then when the war ends, they went back down. Also around 1975, what you would see there is the first woman. In 1975, you see the first graduating class with a bunch of men and 1 woman. And then as you get to the 80s, and by the 90s, you see that the classes are about half men, half women, as they were in my day. Now then they got, maybe in the early 2000s, maybe a little more women than men, and now you can't tell what gender anyone is, or ask. So we don't know. We don't know. That's another issue that we need to manage. It's kind of funny, but it's also something that's happening that we need to deal with and discuss in the direction which our movement is going.
Why did UAHC become URJ, and how recent is it?
It was at the end of Rabbi Yaffe's term, I believe. So maybe 11, 12 years ago. They just felt it made more sense, and it was easier to say, and it represented who we were more. I think it was really just a branding idea that they felt more defined who we are. And I guess that's how, you have to understand when HUC was founded, there was no conservative Judaism. Didn't exist. Didn't exist till after the Treifa banquet, which is a whole different class. But you were either Orthodox or you weren't. And so what the Reform movement said when you founded Hebrew Union College and the UAHC, which became the URJ, is that we want to make a very clear and distinct separation between us and the Orthodox. So today, nobody would have to do that, right? Nobody would have to say, we really need to do something so that people don't think we're Orthodox. Nobody does. But back then, they did, and that's why they became really radical and got rid of yarmulkes and got rid of, purposely ate shrimp and so forth. Now we say, you know what? They know we're not Orthodox, so it's okay to bring the yarmulke back. That's actually what happened. Okay, so those are 2 organizations: the UHC, which became the URJ, which is the Union of the Congregations; the Hebrew Union College, which is the seminary of the Reform movement. And he founded one other organization, which is the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, of which I'm a member. All of our rabbis are members. This is the Rabbis Union. Later on, there became also a Cantors Union called the ACC, which also has a very good basketball league. The Association of American Cantorial Conference? Cantors Conference, the ACC. But the CCAR, basically, it has its own board. Every year it appoints a new president who is a rabbi. And you serve as president of CCAR like you would as president of a congregation. It's a volunteer position, and there's a board. So about 3 years ago, I was finally elected to the board. Took 20 years. Yeah. It's not an easy board to get on, because they say, I think there's 18 rabbis on the board. So they say, all right, we need a certain amount of men and a certain amount of women. So there's only 9 slots open for me. And then they say, well, we need one from each part of the country. So how many do they need from the southeast? 2, maybe. Now, Judith Siegel is on the board as well, although she's about to go off. But for 2 years, I'm staying on, she's going off. She was on before me. So there were only 2 rabbis from the southeast, from Florida. But there were also 2 rabbis from Pinecrest. We live about 2 blocks from each other. So So, the Southeast wasn't very well represented, but Pinecrest was extraordinarily well represented. Which, she works in Coral Gables, but she lives in Pinecrest. And then, they want to have a certain amount who are from large congregations, a certain amount from mid-sized congregations, and a couple of Hillel rabbis, and a couple of rabbis who are in academia. So by the time a slot opens up for a white heterosexual male from Florida in a large congregation, it's almost impossible. So finally one opened up, and yeah, that wasn't even the most offensive part. So, Fair enough. Okay, so now we have three congregations: the HUC, the CCAR, and the URJ. Today, the president. Let me take you back a little bit. I guess I was a rabbi maybe 2 or 3 years, and there was a convention I think it was in Atlanta. Although I can't remember. Every year there's a CCR convention in a different American city, except every 7 years it's in Israel. And the one that's in Israel starts in 2 weeks. So Rabbi Klepi and I are going to it in Jerusalem. There was a meeting at a convention. So I had been a rabbi maybe 2 years, so about 19 years ago. In the middle of the convention, there were a group of rabbis, about the 20 largest synagogues in the country. And they got together and they said to the union, which was the UHC at the time, if you don't make some significant changes, us 20 are seceding from the union. And most of, why would anyone care what these 20 rabbis say? Because the union gets its dues from the congregations. And these were the 20 wealthiest congregations. So these 20 rabbis said, we don't like the way that the reform movement is going. And we have this whole platform that we want to change. And they called themselves the RVI, the Rabbinic Vision Initiative. Anyone ever heard of this? The RVI? Okay. So the RVI was led by a few different rabbis. One of them was a guy named Peter Rubenstein, who was the senior rabbi, Central Synagogue in New York City. And they there was a lot of tumult. Because basically these 20 rabbis were saying, we're going to force significant change in the movement. Well, the rest of the rabbis, who were at smaller congregations, felt that this was like the worst, that this was blasphemy. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Just because you're the richest congregations, you can change the whole movement and we have no say? So I'm at the time at a pretty large congregation in Charlotte. It was like maybe 1,200 families at the time, but I'm an assistant rabbi who didn't know anything about anything, really. And I certainly didn't know about the politics of all this stuff. So they say they're going to have a meeting at the convention. They asked the convention people if they would give them a room, and any rabbi who wanted could come to the convention and hear them out, hear what they have to say, why they want to have these changes to the URJ, which at the time was the UHC, but you know what I mean. So I don't remember really what went on. Me and my friends, who knew nothing, we didn't dare say a word. I mean, this was way over our heads. We just brought popcorn. And we were just ready, because everyone knew this was going to be a war. Because these, 20 or so rabbis were going to stand up there, and the rest of the rabbis were just going to let them have it. So Peter Rubenstein gave up, and he gave this whole thing about all the things that were wrong with the URJ. And to be honest, I don't remember any of them. But I think a lot of them had to do with getting a little bit away from such a focus on social action and social justice and bringing a little bit more back to Jewish tradition, a reinvestment in Jewish youth, and things like that. The things that people say whenever they are trying to point out what's wrong with the movement. So he gets up and speaks, and people ask questions, and I'm just sitting there watching. I honestly don't remember any of the questions. But then one rabbi from California gets a chair like this, and he stands up, and he's holding a box of popcorn. And he stands up and he says, I represent the NSB congregations. NSB, not so big. The not so. To this day, I remember this guy. Ironically, he's now the head of the nominating committee of the CCAR for the board. He just put me back on. But we were joking about it the other day. So he gets up and he starts blasting these guys. Who do you think you are? And everybody's cheering for him. And me and my friends are sitting there just in awe of all of this. We don't even, we're still trying to find the restrooms in our own synagogues. We don't know what's going on. We're watching this. It's unbelievable. So what happens? These 20 guys get their way. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know, Eric Yaffe, the president, I was going to say prime minister, the president of the URJ, retires. And who becomes the new head? Rick Jacobs, who was the senior rabbi at Westchester Reform in Scarsdale, New York. Who's Rick Jacobs? One of the 20. They said, we want one of our guys, and we're going to put him in. So now, he's been president for, 12, 13 years. He's a wonderful guy. I'm friends with him. He didn't know who I was until I came here. But then one day, I'm sitting at my desk at Fort Myers. Rick Jacobs on the phone. Really? Mazel tov, I hear you're going to Temple Beth Am. Oh, now all of a sudden, now I'm here, But whatever, that's fine. He's a very, very nice guy. So I'm going to take you step by step on what's just happened over the last month. The Reform rabbis have a CCAR Facebook page. And it's only, you have to be a member of the CCAR to be on this Facebook page. And every once in a while, someone is suspended, or, because rabbis fight with each other. Someone will say that, how can we have our convention in Israel? Don't you know what they're doing to the Palestinians? And someone like me will say, we like Israel, we're Jews. I've actually disengaged, especially since I've been on the CCR board, but I don't get into these arguments anymore because they're nonsense. But someone came on and said, ever since the movement's going in the wrong direction for a variety of reasons. Here are the main reasons that most rabbis are upset with the movement. One, there is no sense of the movement anymore in the general regions because all of the movements used to have a regional director, a rabbi who was in the region who would schlep from town to town and visit you and connect with your board and so forth. They don't have those anymore. Maybe 8, 9 years ago, they got rid of them for budgetary reasons. They just don't have them. So we have no connection to the movement. The investment in youth has almost disappeared. The conventions that they used to have a few times a year, they hardly ever have them, and when they have them, they're terrible. There's no investment in them. There's no full-time youth professionals working in the regions. And so the youth programs have totally fallen apart. The investment in Judaism at the camps, in the camp system, is really not so great. And a lot of rabbis are very upset with the Judaism that the kids are getting at camp. And we go to camp. We'll go for a week or so, and they underutilize us, and they don't let us do what we're there to do. And, so just general youth programs is really a problem. And where the main problem is with that is it used to be that Reform rabbis, the camps were the pipeline. And every year you'd have from Camp Coleman, someone going to HUC, from Camp Kutz. So they had a great leadership program where you take the best of your kids who you think could be leaders in the Jewish world, and you send them to a camp called Kutz in New York. They closed Kutz down. So they closed the leadership camp to save money. And that was a huge disaster. And one of the things we're seeing is that HUC can't find anybody who wants to be a rabbi. I mean, now, that's not the only reason. St. Thomas down the road right here, they can't find an assistant pastor. This is a beautiful place to be a pastor. They pay a high salary for that field in a beautiful place, Miami. Father Tim over there, who's a friend of mine, he's dying. He can't find anyone. So I told him, I'll rent you, Rabbi Eklep. No, I'm just kidding. But it's not just Judaism that people don't want to be in religion. It's all, but also we're having tremendous problems, and our recruiting is a disaster. So one of the rabbis who was in the RVI, who's actually the senior rabbi of the largest synagogue in the world, which is in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. They have like some 3,200 families. He says, you know, you guys replaced, you RVI people, you replaced Yafi with one of your guys, and you haven't done anything. Nothing. In fact, you've made it worse. So he comes on and says, if you go back to the platform, all the things that we said that you should do, you didn't do any. The union didn't do any of them. So don't blame us. We told you what to do and you didn't do them. Well, it's your guy. But you have to deal with the URJ board and bureaucracy and all this stuff. So, okay, fine. So now we're in a position where many, many rabbis feel, and congregations feel, that they have almost no connection to the URJ. There's no magazine anymore. They cut the magazine, and even though it only came out 4 times a year, it gave you at least a sense of who's out there, what's happening, and so forth. And there are lots of other organizations that have done a much better job with internet, with their websites. You know, a lot of Reformed Jews go on Chabad.org or Aish.com because there's really good stuff there. And if you go on the URJ website, the URJ website gets more hits than Aish.com and Chabad.org. But it's not, the learning's not as deep. It's not even close. People find what they need. But, you know, if you want to find what's this week's Torah portion, or what verses do I need to chant, or where can I find a congregation in Little Rock, Arkansas, you know, you can go on there and you can find what you want. But it doesn't have the kind of learning and that these other places have. So there's a lot of disillusionment now with the movement. So what's happened? Am I doing on time? A new RVI has emerged. Actually, I would say 2 of them have emerged. And somehow I've been wrangled into both of them. But the first one came about. Let me say one other thing about the Reform movement before I get into that. There's so much to talk about here. This is a whole course. This isn't just... the other problem with the movement is that it has become, there's zero diversity of opinion. It's very left of center, and that's the official position of the movement. And if you're a rabbi or a congregation that has a different position, they're not interested. And also, their take on Israel is left of center. Now, what's interesting about that is maybe up until like maybe 2000, the Second Intifada, till about 2000, to be left of center in Israel. I'm sorry, to be left of center in America on Israel. You had a wonderful home in Israel, the Labor Party, because there actually was a left of center party in Israel that was very popular, and the prime minister usually came out of there. This is the home of Ben Gurion and Golda Meir and Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres. That left wing doesn't exist anymore. Everyone who was there is now in the center, is now Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, and that group. And everyone who was right of that is either right or even further right. And the people who are still on the people who are the left wing of Israel now, up until 2000, were the far left, the Meretz, you know. So that group is now the left wing. So for the Reform movement to still be with the left wing, they used to be with the mainstream left. Now they're with the far left. And that drives people crazy if you're not that far left on Israel. They're also there on basically every other issue. And so the URJ in some ways is living up to the nickname, the Democratic Party with holidays, which it's been given. Now, if you happen to love everything, you know, all of their views and all of their, okay, fine. But it's just constantly, you know, jamming that down your throat to the exclusion of Jewish tradition. It's gotten very murky, and it's become very problematic. So a big thing that came out when I was at this meeting in Dallas last week You've been following this thing with Ilhan Omar. The Ilhan Omar was taken off her assignments by vote, by McCarthy and so forth. Okay, fine. So you could argue it's not democratic. You shouldn't have done that. Okay, fine. So a variety of very left-wing Jewish organizations supported Omar and denounced, bringing her off of this committee. The Reform movement signed on to it. So now people like me have to come to work with a flood of emails saying, how dare you? How dare you? And I'm saying, I was the only one in the room who said no to that. I said, don't do this. Now, if you wanted to say something about it, you could. But you don't have to do it in a way that defends Ilhan Omar. You might say something like, that's great that you took one anti-Semite off of her committee. Now take Marjorie Taylor Greene off, because she's an anti-Semite too. You want to take someone off for being an anti-Semite? That's great. It's a good start. Now get the rest of them. But instead, rushing to this is a disgrace to democracy, and how can you do this? You may believe that. But is it the Reform movement's job necessarily to do that, and who are you speaking for? Now, sometimes we do. I understand that sometimes you have to. Sometimes we send out we take a stand on something. When George Floyd was killed, we said, it would have been better if you didn't kill him. We're not in favor of you standing on his neck until he dies. We're against that. So we took a stand on that. Some people said, who are you to talk about that? Okay. So, you're going to get that whenever you take a stand on anything, and you can't go through your life not taking stands. But I liken it to this. Netanyahu's prime minister now. He's got this far right-wing coalition. And every once in a while, someone in the far right wing says something crazy, like Reform Jews are, Christians. They say stuff like that all the time. That doesn't help Netanyahu. That just annoys him, and he has to deal with that nonsense. And now he's got to waste time either defending or refuting some crazy thing that some, Haredi backbench politician said. But when the Reform movement puts out when the headline is Reform movement defends Ilhan Omar, then I have to waste time either defending or refuting this nonsense. Do they really need to do that? Now, you could answer, yes, they do. That's fine. But it's caused a lot of consternation amongst many Reform Jews and many synagogue presidents and clergy. And so these are some of the different things. So with all of that said, a new movement has now emerged, started by a rabbi in New York City named Ami Hirsch. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Ami Hirsch. Ami Hirsch used to be the head of ARTSA, which is the Association for Reform Zionists of America. I'm also on their board. And they're the Israel wing of the Reform movement. So how many years ago it was? The last time Bibi was prime minister, in number 5, cycle number 5, there was a rabbi from Potomac, Maryland, conservative rabbi. His sister actually goes here, Dror Davis. Her brother-in-law is Stuart Weinblatt, who's a rabbi in Potomac. And he wanted to put a trip together of rabbis to go to Israel to meet with Netanyahu and tell him that Reform and conservative rabbis support him, even though our movements are, giving him a very hard time because of his fight with Obama with the JCPOA, the agreement with Iran. So we got to go to his office and meet with him, and we met with Supreme Court justices, and we met with Lapid and Tzipi Livni, and it was really neat. And we got to spend a couple of days in the foreign ministry and meet all of their people. It was really Michael Oren and so forth. So while we're there, the Reform movement leaders find out that we're there. They're very angry with us. How dare you go? By the way, we were Reform, conservative, and Orthodox rabbis. It wasn't just Reform rabbis. But for the Reform rabbis of us who were there, 4 or 5 of us, they're very, how dare you go and speak in the name of, and say all these things, and you're Reform rabbis, and how. And this was called the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. It still exists. In fact, there was Stuart Weinblatt was at the Federation this week meeting with all the rabbis in Miami trying to get them to be more and more, outspoken in their Zionism, especially now when so many American Jews are upset with what's going on with the Israeli government. So this was the first crack. This was the first crack in the idea, even though it only had to do with Israel, it was the first crack in the idea that other organizations could start to could start to form and come out of the woodwork and present a challenge to the leadership of the URJ. So now what's happened is another movement started by Ami Hirsch, whose father was Dick Hirsch, who was basically the founder, or one of the pioneers of Reform Judaism in Israel, passed away a few years ago, started this movement called Recharging Judaism, Recharging Reform Judaism. And he got a lot of rabbis to sign on, a lot of the big rabbis, the senior rabbis of the largest synagogues in America, all Reform, to sign on and start discussing how to basically come up with RVI 2. And it really has a few main points. One is they want to start teaching Tikkun Olam more in connection to Jewish tradition and mitzvah, as opposed to just social action and social justice. By the way, what is Tikkun Olam? There are a variety of different definitions, but the earliest known reference to Tikkun Olam is from the ancient prayer Aleinu. It's in the second, in the Alkane paragraph of Aleinu, it mentions Letaken et ha'olam, to fix the world. But what it meant was that it was an idea, Kabbalistic ideas came later, but it was an idea that every time you did a mitzvah, you undid something that was wrong. So lighting Shabbos candles could be Tikkun Olam. Any mitzvah that you do is fixing the world. So when you say that only social action is Tikkun Olam, it's inaccurate. It's not. Social action is a mitzvah, fine, but not to the exclusion of all the other mitzvahs. And you shouldn't. So they want to start having more Jewish tradition and get a little bit away from that idea. And they also want to have a much closer connection with Israel. They have a couple other points as well. This time, though, they invited. So they're having a conference. It's May 31st, in New York City. I'm not going. Rachel's going. I would have gone, but it's my daughter's 17th birthday. So I don't know how many more birthdays we're going to have with her at home. She's a junior in high school. I said, any other day I'd do it. Not doing it that day. I missed most of her childhood. I'm not missing this. So Rachel's going to go and represent us. But Rick Jacobs is going to be there. And Andrew Rayfeld, the president of HUC, is going to be there. And instead of this being a crack and a breakaway, they want it to be a dialogue. They want to see how we can work together to. I hope it goes well, but we'll see. So that's kind of where the URJ is right now. But I want to focus on HUC, which to me is well more concerning. So HUC, the Hebrew Union College, the original campus was in Cincinnati because that's where Isaac Mayer Wise was when he founded it. They later added 3 more campuses. One campus in Jerusalem, which is an amazing story in its own right. Have any of you ever been to the campus in Jerusalem of HUC? It's pretty incredible. It's right next to the King David Hotel. There's one other building, and then there's the King David Hotel. And then just down the road is the David Citadel and the Mamilla area. And it overlooks the old city, just like the King David does. One time I was there 5-6 years ago. We were doing a bar mitzvah on the roof, overlooking the old city. And from there, it's an unbelievable vantage point. It was one of our members was having his bar mitzvah there on our temple trip, and the photographer was there, and we were looking at the bar mitzvah boy, and in the back, the walls of the old city, and I said to him, this is the best view in all of Israel. And he said to me, no, it's the best view in the world. I said, he's never been to Miami. No, I'm just kidding. It was really very special. So actually the story was that there was a Reformed synagogue that was bombed by Orthodox hoodlums in the early 60s. And Teddy Kollek, who was the mayor of Jerusalem at the time, felt bad for them. And so he gave them this piece of land to build their seminary. And that's why we have such an amazing, priceless piece of land right there on King David Street, overlooking the old city. So we had that campus since the 60s. There's a campus there's a building on the campus of the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And there's a building along the campus of NYU in New York City. So those are your campuses. Every student goes for their first year to Jerusalem, and then 4 years in the States. So I went to Jerusalem, and then you get a letter when you're in Jerusalem one day telling you what campus you're going to. I requested New York, I got Cincinnati. So I requested New York because no one I ever known had ever really even heard of Cincinnati or knew anything about it. And all my friends from college were in New York. But I realized two things. One, there's no golf in New York. So I don't know what I would have done. I avoided a terrible mistake there. And I met my wife, as I mentioned before, in Cincinnati. So it worked out. It worked out. Maybe 7-8 years ago, there was a discussion in the movement about closing the main campus of Cincinnati. And the reason was, so by the way, the reason they sent me to Cincinnati and they didn't fulfill my request is because they send most people to Cincinnati because they have the most room there. They only send, if there were maybe 30 students in my class, in my Jerusalem year, 18 of them went to Cincinnati. And the remaining 12 were split between New York and LA. They're much smaller campuses. So they decided about 7-8 years ago that they were going to look into closing the Cincinnati campus because the cost of maintaining 3 campuses is enormous, and the number of students who are applying to become rabbis has gone down and down. There was a tremendous backlash. Rabbis all over the country, all of HUC's supporters, a lot of whom are the big Jewish families in Cincinnati, everybody went crazy. And David Ellenson, who was president at the time, said, all right, I see we can't do this. This may have been 10, 12 years ago. David Ellenson, who was the president when I was ordained, he retired a few years after that. He had been a professor for decades there. And then a guy named Aaron Pankin became president. Any of you ever heard of Aaron Pankin? He's a wonderful guy. The first time I met Aaron Pankin was when I went for my interview in New York. And for whatever reason, he was fascinated by tennis. And since I'd played tennis in college, it was helpful to me in the interview. He brought me into my interview in New York. He was a really wonderful guy. And then I didn't meet him he was in Charlotte once as a scholar in residence. Maybe I met him 6-7 years later. About 3 or 4 years ago, he died in a plane crash. And he'd only been president for a couple of years, and it was devastating. It was just absolutely devastating because he's a pretty young guy, wonderful man. And after he passed away, Ellenson came back as the interim president for a year or so, and then they elected a new president. And
Was he president of all 3 campuses?
yeah, when you're the president of the whole thing. So now they elected a new president, but this time they did something different. They elected a president for the first time in HUC's history who was not a rabbi. Not only that, he had a PhD, but not in Jewish stuff, like a PhD in history. He was a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, and then he became the president of the Federation of St. Louis. So they hired him to become a rabbi, to become the president of Hebrew Union College, presumably because he was good at raising money and had some experience as a Jewish leader. He basically, over the last 12 months, decided that he's going to close the Cincinnati campus. And so after maybe they're sunsetting it, and in another year and a half, it'll be closed. This is not a popular move. It may have been the right financial move, but pretty much every rabbi who was ordained there just can't believe it. I mean, imagine if they closed your college. I mean, you just can't believe it. Not to mention the American Jewish Archives and the Clow Library, which is the second largest Jewish library in the world, is there. And what are you going to do with it? The American Jewish Archives, this massive building that one professor, Gary Zola, had created over decades with Jacob Rader Marcus and now Gary Zola, and it's this incredible facility of Jewish learning. And there really aren't that many Jews left in Cincinnati. I mean, who's going to use it? There's no serious academic centers of Jewish study anywhere near there that anyone is going to have any interest in that. And it's really depressing. So that was one of the first key factors that has been really hard to swallow over the last year. While this is happening, and this is where this really affects us and where this is troubling, the number of rabbinic students applying is less, but at the same time, the amount of second-rate rabbinic seminaries is mushrooming. They're popping up all over the place. You can become ordained online. You can become ordained at Hebrew College in Boston, and a variety of other places where people are getting these degrees, calling themselves rabbis, and going to communities that need rabbis and are being hired. And to call them inferior or second rate is no exaggeration. When you go to HUC, every professor has a PhD from the Ivy League or University of Chicago, serious scholars. And most of them are rabbis too. When you go to these other institutions, the professors don't have PhDs. They're not experts in what they're teaching. And it's just second rate. Yeah.
Does the CCR let them in? Second-rate rabbis from second-rate schools?
No. You can't become...
Rejects their application.
Yeah, you can't become... You can become a CCR member if you went to JTS. JTS is a place of serious academic study. And there are a couple international ones that are serious academic study, but these other ones, no.
So that's a quality control measure.
But if we wanted to hire one of those rabbis here, we could. There's nothing they could do to stop us. We wouldn't.
We can do that.
Right.
Would we do that?
No. But other congregations who don't want to pay as much money or are in remote areas and they can't afford or they can't attract rabbis, they can get one of these rabbis. By the way, it's happening in Miami too. So it's happening all over the country. In Fort Myers, for a while they replaced me with a canner who didn't even graduate high school. Didn't even graduate college, can't read Hebrew, doesn't know anything. Now, he moved and opened up his own place and they hired a real rabbi. But, as long as you know a little bit more than your congregants, the congregants think you know a lot. That's not how it should be, right? A rabbi should be, to be a rabbi. Here's what it used to be. Have you ever heard of Rabbi Isaac Meir Lau? Anyone ever heard of him? Okay, he's a former chief rabbi of Israel. And he was one of the youngest Holocaust survivors. I think he was 6 years old when they liberated Buchenwald. So his brother, blanking on his brother's name right now, but his brother also survived Buchenwald with him. And they came from a very, very famous European line of rabbis. The Lau family goes back, forever. Lau comes from the word law. They were the ones who knew Jewish law. So his brother was 13, and he was 6. And when they left Buchenwald and they came to Israel, they said to the brother, "You're already too old to become a rabbi, but your brother's still young enough that he has a chance." At 13. Because they said, "You've already missed 13, you haven't gotten this education. That's how hard it used to be a rabbi. You had to be, from birth, now you go online, you take a couple of courses, I'm a rabbi. It's not right. But this is what's happening. So in order to compete with these other organizations, the Hebrew Union College decided we're going to have a low residency program. Instead of having to go to Israel for a year and then studying for 4 years on those campuses, you can just do a correspondence online and you'll come 2 months a year and study. So this came in front of the board of the CCAR, and they took a straw poll. What do you all think? Should we have a low residency program? We already have rabbis who, they're not that well versed as they should be in Jewish text. And now you're saying, let's lower the qualifications to become a Reform rabbi at Hebrew Union College. Every single person on the board voted in favor of it except for 2. I was one of the 2. There was one other rabbi from California who stood with me on this one. Passed. It's a thing now. You can become a HUC rabbi online. Yeah, you have to go for 2 months a year. But it's not the same. So the reaction to the competition was to lower our standards as opposed to reinvest and try to figure out ways to build it up. Now it came across, there's one college, Hebrew College in Boston, which isn't terrible, but it's not, they do have a couple of real scholars there, but it's not it shouldn't be a rabbinic seminary, in my opinion. They've said, we're changing a rule to make it lower the barrier of entry to become a rabbi. There used to be a, my wife Jody, I don't know if you know this, you might, she converted. She used to be a Republican. No, I'm just kidding. She used to be Methodist. When I met her, do y'all know the story how I met Jody? No. So, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty famous story. So I got to Cincinnati. It's a quick story. I'll squeeze it in. But I got to Cincinnati. I go to the pool of our apartment complex. Here's a woman in a bathing suit reading Exodus by Leon Uris. This is everything that I'm looking for. This is perfect. I say, hello, I just moved here from Israel. You're reading a book about Israel. She said, I'm not Jewish. I said, what kind of sick joke is this? Who's someone playing? I thought it was like someone was going to pop out with a camera on a TV show. So she says, I graduated from college and I had a Jewish boyfriend in college and we broke up, but I'm interested in Judaism. I said, you've come to the right place. So, and that's how our relationship began. We started dating. The very first conversation was, are you interested in being Jewish or not? Because if you're not, tell me right now, because I can't date you, I'll be thrown out of school. That was the very first thing. I remember I was sitting in my apartment and I said that to her. She's like, no, I'm interested. Okay. A few weeks later, walking through the halls of the college, the dean comes up to me. He says, oh, here you have a new girlfriend. Right away I said, she's converted. That was it. But what I did was, I brought her to my professors. And I said, you guys convert her. You guys teach her. They loved it. They loved her right away. She took classes with them, converted. If I would have said, she's thinking about it. He might have said something to me like, well, we're thinking about you. I would have been thrown out. If I were dating her seriously and she was not interested in conversion, I would have been thrown out of school. That was the rule. That still is the rule. Hebrew College just announced you no longer have to be married or dating a Jew to be admitted to become a rabbi. Okay. HUC is next. So, right or wrong, I don't want to comment. I mean, you can make up your own thing. But the only reason they're doing it is because they're not getting applicants, and they're losing applicants to these second-rate institutions. And I think that we're in a moment right now where the Reform movement could potentially split into a little bit more traditional group and the further left group. And the rabbinic school could split for the same reasons. And as HUC, as the Cincinnati campus is closing, there's already people talking about buying it up and starting another institution. I don't think either of those things will happen because it's very expensive. But that's kind of where we are. Now, all of that is the bad and the ugly. What's the good? The good is that, well, something bad that caused something good. And I'll end with this. What's happened in America is that Jews have pretty much left the small towns. There are no jobs there. Where I grew up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where my grandfather had 900 families, in a really bustling conservative synagogue, if they have 100 families there now, it's a lot, and there's probably no one under 80, except for my friend Steve Rosenthal, who stayed, who I couldn't stand. He's still there. He can have it. We were rivals on the tennis court. I'm not bitter. Just because he beat me in the district. I don't care. But all of my friends who grew up there are in New York, are in Philadelphia, are in Los Angeles, are in Chicago. None of them went back home because there's no jobs there. It used to be a textile town and a coal town, and there's nothing there now. Even the doctors don't want to go back there. They'd rather go to New York or Philadelphia. And that's what's happening all over the country. Rabbi Greengrass grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The Jewish community there is not bustling. There's nobody. They're lucky to even have a rabbi. So where'd those Jews go? Big cities. That's where the jobs are now. And what's happened is Jews have concentrated in the big cities around the country. So there are a lot more places around the country where people will never meet a Jew. But in the big cities, we are concentrated, and because of that, we're stronger together. And so what I've known, you could ask me any large synagogue in America, and I could probably tell you within 100 families how many members they have. I keep a really close track. By the way, anyone can find this out. If you go on the URJ's website and you go to find a congregation and you type in the name of that congregation, they'll tell you how many families they have. And they keep it updated because it's based on the amount of dues members you pay to go there. So I watch very closely every big synagogue in America, and I know exactly how many families they have. And pretty much all of the big city synagogues have either stayed the same or gone up until COVID. COVID, they all lost a couple hundred. You could see every single one of them. They all went down. Anyone who was 2,000 is now 1,800. Almost everyone went down to 200. COVID, we went from 1,550 to 1,700 because all the New Yorkers came here. And we had the school for them. Thank God. Our religious school grew by 100 kids because everybody came to Miami. Miami's just on fire right now. God willing, it'll stay that way. But because of that, big synagogues in big cities are hiring more rabbis. So there's no job in Wilkes-Barre or Fort Wayne anymore, but there are a couple extra jobs in Philadelphia. Because whereas they had 3 or 4 rabbis, now they have 4 or 5. And they're able to have rabbis that meet all of the different age groups that they're trying to attract. What's happened is the synagogues, the big synagogues that have good leadership, have figured out how to do it without the help or support of the movement. And we have here too. We have very little help or support from the Reform movement. I wish there were more. There are ways it could be done. Chabad has it actually down to a science. The way that they service their congregations, you could go into any Chabad in the world and get the same curriculum. They have the same adult education, children's education, and they have experts sitting in New York working on it and updating it. We don't have that. Everything that we do, we have to do ourselves. And we figured out ways to do it. That's why there are all these kids here. But it's happening without the movement. So what happens in such a case? How long before congregations like us say, why are we sending hundreds of thousands of dollars to the movement? What do we get for it? I mean, that would be a very good question right now. So the answer that's always been is, well, you can send your kids to the camps. You can send your kids to Camp Coleman. But now you say, what, are there no other Jewish camps? There's a Jewish camp every 10 feet. There are a lot of Jewish camps. Jews go to camp more than anybody else. Jews love camp. Now, there's a difference between camps for Jews and Jewish camps. And Coleman's a Jewish camp. But there are others too. And so we'll have to see. So right now, just to put a cap on this, our institutions have a lot of issues. And I don't know, at what point are we just going to say we're in a post-denominationalist movement and have all of our resources come together? I mean, for example, you have JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, sitting in New York City, and Hebrew Union College closing in Cincinnati but staying in New York. Why not combine? I mean, the professors, the Talmud that they teach, the Bible that they teach, the Hebrew that they teach, the Jewish history that they teach, it's the same stuff. There are a couple other courses on conservative response, reform response. Okay, so you have a couple other teachers. The reform students go here for a class, the conservative, but most of the stuff is the same. How to talk to people in the hospital, how to do funerals, a lot of it, how to write a sermon. Well, nobody's figured that out. But all of this is the same stuff. So, why not converge? And once they do the movements still really exist? I don't know. So we're about to enter a new period called post-denominationalism. David Ellenson was talking about this 20 years ago, but we're finally entering this new era. And while the movements try to figure out what they're going to do, people like us in places like this say, what's the difference? We need to keep sticking to our mission and doing what we do here, whether they're going to help us or not. To a certain extent, there's a lot more we could get into, but those are the highs and lows of where the movement is, as I see it right now. So I'm happy to take any questions. I do have more time if anyone has any more. Otherwise, there's plenty of cookies left. So, yeah, Norm.
What happened to the faculty of the campus in Cincinnati?
I think the ones who are tenured will have an option to go to.
So they're tenured in the other two.
Yeah, some of them will have the option to go to New York, LA, or Jerusalem. Some of them are retiring because they said, I've lived in Cincinnati for 40 years. I'm not going to New York. I'm not going to LA. That's a big lifestyle change, when you've been in Cincinnati for 40 years. And they said, you know what, I'm retiring. And some of them will go to other institutions. They'll go to, college, University of Michigan, Harvard, wherever. So some of them will probably leave and go to different colleges, universities.
Frequently on faculty problems.
Yeah, I mean, what they have going for them is they're all the best at what they do. So if you want a Jewish history professor, they could easily go to Dartmouth or, wherever. These guys all of them have their PhDs from the Ivy League. These are very serious scholars who are at the top of their field. So they'll be able to find other jobs. But, at this point in their life, do they really want to? But, I was on their website the other day, and there's only, I think, 3 professors who are there now who were there when I was there. I mean, I graduated 21 years ago, but there's only 3 left from back then. It's all new people. So a lot of them are younger, and, I guess they'll go wherever they can get a job.
I guess I'm just thinking that this is the nature of things. I mean, this is not a tragedy. This is progress, even though it may not be progress the way we thought we wanted to see it, but it's part of the world changing all the time, and change can be very good. And we have a different world to deal with than we did 50 or 100 years ago.
From my point of view, the only part that's bad is that our response to low supply of rabbis is to lower our barriers of entrance. So I would rather get 10 qualified rabbis than 15 unqualified, candidates for graduation. And I think, the quality of rabbis is going to go down.
But that kind of problem indicates that there's another bigger issue, obviously. And, I mean, hopefully it's a temporary solution to lower those standards.
But I think the problem, unfortunately, isn't a problem with us. It's a problem with America and the world.
Right.
All religions are having trouble. Even YU, even Yeshiva University, where these kids are programmed to be rabbis from birth, their numbers are down. Not as far down as us, but they're down. JTS, numbers way down. Our numbers, Hebrew Union College, way down. If it were up to me, if I was the president of Hebrew Union College, I would get all the billionaires in the reform movement together in a room. And I would say, listen, between all you guys, we need a $100 million endowment for this college, HUC, to keep Cincinnati open. And we need a whole new strategy and all the resources it's going to take to go out and recruit. And I'll tell you something. I offered to recruit. And I offered to organize all of the rabbis in Florida to go to UF, to go to UM, to go to Florida State, and to try to recruit and to speak. They told me they didn't need me. And I was just like, we're having trouble. I will organize all the Reform rabbis in Florida to go and do this. And they're like, yeah, no, we're good. Oh, okay, great.
HUC turned out.
Yeah, they said they didn't need me. So.
Are you surprised that the far left members of the movement, i.e. the ones who support Omar staying on committees, haven't targeted the summer camps because the summer camps are segregated and exclusive?
Wait, so I didn't understand the question. Say it one more time.
I'm surprised, well, I'll say, I'm surprised that these people haven't targeted the camps because the camps are segregated and exclusive.
They probably will at some point. They probably will. But the camps are their money makers. That's where they get a lot of their money. So they don't mess with them too much. But I will tell you, and I didn't grow up in this because I grew up in the conservative movement. And I didn't go to I didn't really go to Jewish summer camp. I went one summer, but I was so into sports that I only played sports all summer. And I went to an Orthodox day school, so I didn't need any more Judaism in the summers. I got plenty of it. The camps were always the pipeline of rabbis. You'd always identify a few cantors and rabbis at each of the 10 or 11 camps, and it's not happening anymore.
And then they would go to Sefti, and then they
Yeah.
would go to Kutz, and
Right, and you had them, and that. So I agree with you on the change, but that one change of lowering the barriers, I will never support it. And even though I'm the only, the other rabbis were like, "Why are you going against this?" I'm like, "You agree with this?" They're like, "No, but it's a done deal, so why bother?" And I said, "Well, someday I'm going to be proud to say I was the only one in the room who disagreed with this, because this is wrong." But we'll see. Anyway, thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate it.